following is a taped interview with Mr. Eugene Clark, Superintendent Plant 1 at Warner-Gear Corporation here in Muncie. Mr. Clark went to work at Warner-Gear at a very early age, back in the 1930s. He has worked there until the present time. He was present when the union was organized. He has been a union steward, and he has spent most of his time as supervisor for Warner-Gear. When I worked at Warner-Gear several years ago, Gene, you were my foreman, and in spite of the fact that I was active in union affairs, we had a very high regard for one another, and I also had the privilege of working for you briefly as a group leader, we call it one time. And I enjoyed that very much, and I know that having worked with the union, that you have been held in very high regard in spite of the fact that you spent most of your time on supervision and now have reached what we might call something pretty close to the top of supervision at Warner-Gear. Let me first of all congratulate you, Gene, for the success you've made.
Thanks, Dan.
Now, Gene, this tape, as you know, we talked briefly earlier, and I enjoyed talking with you very much. This tape will be used to help document a study of the labor movement in Muncie and the history of Local 287 at Warner-Gear. And also it will be used partly for future students of history who want to study the Muncie community, who want to study the labor movement in this area. It will be placed on file in Ball State University's library and will be available hopefully in several hundred years from now. So I look forward, Gene, to talking with you, and I'm quite sure that students in the future are going to benefit from the deep insight that you have into the history of Warner-Gear and Local 287, the labor movement and labor management relations, since you've been on both sides of the fence for such a long period of time, at different times. Gene, let me start out by getting a little bit of history about you. When did you first go to work at Warner-Gear?
1934, December 1934.
Right out of high school, probably.
Right.
And you played on the Bearcats.
Right.
Yeah. Now, what did you do when you went to work at Warner-Gear to begin with? What was the job that you had?
I had a job running a milling machine on the transmission frame.
Uh-huh. Gene, did they have any kind of labor union when you went to work at Warner-Gear?
No.
Now, when did you join Local 287 UAW?
Well, I would guess it was sometime in the late 30s.
Uh-huh. What attracted you to the union, Gene? Why did you become a member of a labor organization as a worker? Were you still working on a machine?
Still working on a machine.
Why did you decide to become a member of a union?
Well, at that time it looked like it was a movement that was beneficial to the employees.
Uh-huh. Do you think that back in the 30s, when was it organized? 1937, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that conditions improved as a result of the organization's activity?
They have.
Right. Now, when were you a steward? I understand you were a union steward one time.
I was a shop committeeman in must have been maybe 42 or 43.
That's the same job then that I had
Right.
over there when I worked with you.
Right.
Uh-huh. Well, that's fine. Now, who were some of the fellows who worked on the committee with you back in those days? Do you remember?
Well, Roscoe Reynolds.
Yes, I remember Roscoe.
Leo Myers. I just can't remember them all at that time.
Well, those two I remember, and maybe Ben Weeks might have been
Weeks
back in those days.
Right.
Gene, what were some of the things that you fellows were trying to gain during the late 30s and early 40s, working through the union labor organization? What were some of the goals and objectives that you were trying to accomplish in those days?
Better working conditions.
For example, shorter hours?
Shorter hours, and and just better working conditions in general as far as safety and job standards.
Seniority rights.
Seniority rights is a big thing,
Mm-hmm.
and of course our insurance programs and et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, many of these things have been accomplished. It's possible some of them might have been done whether the labor union had been there or not. But I think it may also be pretty obvious that you fellows continue to work for these things, and you did that through the union, and I'm quite sure that you recognize the benefits of these things.
Yes.
Over the years. Now, Gene, when did you go on supervision?
1948.
And you have been on supervision since 1948, 21 years. What are the various jobs you've held as supervisor?
I was number one job is I was a foreman of a small department for approximately 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
Then I was made general foreman of 4 departments.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on that job up till March 1st of this year, from 1953 up to that time.
And you, of course, now are superintendent.
Right.
Now, have you noticed any sort of hostility on the part of management to you because of your former association with the labor union movement?
No, none
No
whatsoever.
prejudice at all there?
None whatsoever.
Yeah. Now, does Warnegere truly, deeply accept the labor union as part of the process of collective bargaining at Warnegere and as part of the institution?
Oh, I'm sure they do.
Yeah, you do, and you know. What are some of the things that the labor union does today for the fellows working on the machines in Plant 1? What are some of the typical complaints that you might consider to be legitimate, that from time to time would be an oversight on your part or on one of your foremen's part, where you would have an individual that would talk with his steward, the job you used to have, or committeeman that you used to have, and that the union could do something to ameliorate the situation or to try to help work it out in a peaceful way, hopefully, and would make this fellow's job a happier situation and a fairer situation. I understand you don't always agree. Of course, if the steward comes to you and says, this man's got a grievance, he may or may not have. Of course, I understand that. But what are some of the problems they come to you with, typically?
Well, of course, number one is that we've got to think about quality parts if we want to stay in business, and naturally, oftentimes a machine will not be capable of running quality work, and the steward will come to me about that problem, and then oftentimes we will have to maybe reprimand the employee for not checking the work with the frequency that was set up in time study. Of course, through trial and error and practice error, we've got these machines all geared to feeding the speeds that we expect to maintain quality work. And maybe we'll have a problem there where somebody will maybe want to speed his machine up, where he'll be running inferior work there.
So he can finish earlier in the day?
Finish earlier in the day, and maybe we'll have problems with the steward in that nature.
Now, these are typical situations where the steward comes in and makes a complaint to you, and what happens then?
We naturally we'll investigate them. Myself there, being a general foreman. foreman there, I'll check to be sure that he's always conferred with a foreman who is directly involved in this area, and be sure that the foreman is aware of this complaint that Stewart's made. And if he's not aware of it, why, I'll ask him to take the time to investigate the problem and then report back to me, and then in turn I'll talk to the Stewart about the situation if there continues to remain a problem.
And what happens? Would you say that on the average that you and your foreman and the steward and the man individually can work out most of these grievances on the ground floor where they originate?
Most of them.
And then if you're not able to come to a meeting of minds on the problem, what happens then?
Well, then the steward will initiate a grievance, and then it goes through the proper channels that's set up in the management union agreement. He'll reduce it in writing.
He puts it in writing. Then it comes to you, and you give your answer in writing.
I'll give an answer in writing, and I'll get everybody that's involved in this particular problem, and we'll talk this problem or be sure that we're putting a proper answer on the grievance.
And then if the man still isn't happy, or if the union still isn't happy with your written reply, it goes to the second step of the grievance procedure, which would be to what? Labor Relations Director? Superintendent, which is to you now.
Yeah.
And then after that, it goes to the Labor Relations Director.
That's right.
And now, as superintendent, do you have the authority to reverse the decision of one of your foremen if you want to?
Yes.
Does this sometimes happen?
Yes.
Sometimes happens. Does the Labor Relations Director have the authority to reverse your decision?
Yes.
And this sometimes happens?
Yes.
Now, sometimes on the other side of the fence, does a steward or committeeman or the man who initiated the grievance accept the fact that they may be demanding something that isn't quite fair or quite just or equitable, whatever it may be, and decide to accept your answer or decide to accept the Labor Relations Director's answer and just withdraw the grievance? Does this happen sometimes?
Yes, it goes clear to the Labor Relations Director, and they sit down with the entire committee and review this grievance. And they try to come to a meeting of the minds about the grievance here, and they may come to some decision here what should be done with this grievance. And if there's nothing worked out to satisfy the plant committee, then this grievance might even be processed to arbitration and let an arbitrator pass on it.
And then both the company and the union accept the arbitration decision.
Decision is binding.
Well, it seems to me that you have a fairly smooth working grievance procedure. Let me ask you, as an administrator and also as a former union official, Gene, do you think that that this procedure serves a useful purpose in the shop? Does it prevent anarchy and chaos and wildcat strikes and this sort of thing that used to prevail back in the 30s?
Sure.
Do you think then that the whole process probably is beneficial? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but probably to the workers and to the company as well?
I'm sure.
If you were president of Warner Gear, I'm promoting you a little ahead here, but as the top administrator or supervisor at Warner Gear, would you like to see the union continue and see it continue to serve the function that it has served and is serving?
Yeah, it has its place in our society now, I believe.
Also, Gene, I should have mentioned this earlier. You're not only, of course, our top supervisor at Warner Gear, a man who went there as a young boy right out of high school, and over the years, someone who has worked his way up all the way to the top. But you also have served the community very well. You know, for example, it occurs to me that you've been on the school board. I believe you were.
I served 9 years on the school board.
Were you president of the school board?
I was president of the school board on 2 2 different occasions.
I thought so. And now, did you also serve on the city council?
Served 1 year, one term on the city council, which is 4 years.
Right. So you're an individual who has made an outstanding contribution not only at Warnagear and the labor movement, but also in the community. And Gene, I know also that you have always had not only the respect but the active support of many of the fellows who work on the machines in the factory and who work with you and for you. And I remember, for example, when I was a very young man working there, that half dozen of us went out to polls and worked for you in the rain one day when you were running for the school board. And I would hazard a guess that you probably got 80 to 90% of the votes of the fellows who worked for you. So I think this is pretty commendable evidence here that you have a reputation of fair dealing and honorable relations with the fellows you work with. And I think that that's a very great record to be able to hold, having been both a union representative and a machine operator and department foreman and all the way up to superintendent. I especially value your points of view, and I'm sure that they'll be very helpful to any student of history or the community trying to understand the intricate relationships here of the labor movement and management at Warnagear. How many people work there now? Do you know, Gene, offhand, approximately?
I think there's about total employment with Warnagear in the office and everything, I think runs a few more than 3,600.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's about 2,900 now in the bargaining unit, something like that.
Well, it used to be a great many more than this, didn't it?
Oh, I think we've had employment there in the office and the plant, I think in excess of maybe 5,000.
Seems to me that it was around 5,000 at one time. Now, how many people worked there when you started in 1934? Approximately, I don't expect.
Oh, I would say maybe they might have been 500.
Is that all? Yeah. What did you have? Just one plant or two plants?
They had 3 plants that time. However, plant 3 was probably wouldn't have covered maybe a block square. At that time. It's a real small plant that time.
Gene, let me ask you another question that I have asked some of the retirees I've been interviewing. You're in a position to know this, or to observe it better than someone who's been out of the shop for 15 or 20 years. The young fellows who are going into the shop now and who have for the past 15 years or so, do they have the same respect for and appreciation of the labor union that you fellows had back in the 30s?
No.
They don't have. What's the difference?
Well, of course, they think it's just working conditions in the shops now are good.
Mm-hmm.
And the younger people, of course, it's really not, can't say it's their fault, but they think it's just always been this way. So consequently, they wouldn't have the respect for that the older people would have.
Gene, what are some of the things that the younger fellows have now that they take for granted that you fellows did not have in 1934, 35, and 6? What are some of the conditions are good, you say, and I accept that. I agree with that. What are some of the things that make conditions good now compared to 1934 when you went to work there?
Well, I think it's the labor and management working together now to create these better conditions.
What are some of them, for example?
Well,
40-hour week is
40-hour week is the main thing, and seniority.
Seniority rise.
Seniority is one of the jewels of working man.
And how about the retirement benefits?
Where you have retirement benefits and of course your insurance, which is a big important thing right now. This is one of the things that retirement, which is a great thing now. This is one of the things that it's hard for the younger people to comprehend this retirement program for the older people now. People with 35 years seniority and 60 years old can retire at a pretty decent retirement right now.
And what happened to a fellow when he got to be 60 or 65 back in the early 30s, Gene?
Just, he couldn't do the job, he was just let out.
I read somewhere where I think it was in Middletown, Robert Helen Lind's Middletown, which came out in the 1920s, that if you got beyond 40, you began to worry.
Yeah.
Because if you got laid off, you probably would have grave difficulty getting a job somewhere else. And there were no seniority rights then.
Yeah.
So it might be that your 18-year-old nephew would replace you.
That's right.
By the fact that you'd been there for 15 or 20 years.
In other words, with our these people that's when they get up in years, past 50, 55, 60, why they can get these lighter jobs too. They're shifted around to where work they can do until such time that they can retire, which is helpful to all employees.
And the company now, in cooperation with the union, willingly recognizes that this is a benefit to the employee, and they're quite willing to do it.
Well, right.
They move these people around in order to make room for someone.
Right.
This would not have been the case 40 years ago when the emphasis was on one thing, and that was production for profit.
To my knowledge, and hearing people with that are older than I am said it, no, this wouldn't have happened.
Can we think of any other benefits that are outstanding that the young people have, they take for granted, that wasn't the case back when you went to work?
Well, sub pay is a big thing for a young employee.
What is this?
Well, this is pay that if they're laid off, why there's so much money put in, so much money is laid aside each week. That when they're laid off, why it supplements their unemployment.
Gene, did you ever get laid off?
Yes.
Back in the 30s?
Right.
Did you have anything like this to fall
No.
back upon?
No. Just
What happened to you?
kind of struggled along and what little money I might save till I got called back to work.
This was a real problem, wasn't it? Constant?
I don't think that the unemployment benefits went in effect till 1937 or 38, I believe it was. And then it was about $26 a week.
What is it now, approximately?
Well, I think that counting unemployment and sub benefits both now, employees there at Warner Gear gets pretty close to $100 a week.
That's remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah.
What would one of your average machine operators earn as a rough guess? 150 a week, maybe?
Yes.
So this really amounts to 65 to 70%
Right.
of his regular income.
Right.
Well, now this would mean, of course, that he might have to skip a payment on his colored television or on his boat, but it would not mean that he might have to sell his house the way it did back in the 30s.
That's right.
And this sort of thing. So this would be, now where are we going from here, Gene? Do you see continued improvement until we finally get the place that unemployment will be no worry at all, the man will be guaranteed maybe even a higher percentage of his pay than he is now? What do you see in the future? In other words, the real question I'm getting at, has labor served its purpose? Have labor unions served their purpose? Have they gained all there is worth fighting for and all there is to gain? And is there any reason why a young man ought to be interested in the labor movement today?
Well, young man ought to be interested. In other words, it's pretty hard for them to comprehend. But you take a fellow like me that has been in the shop for almost 35 years. At 35 years, it goes pretty quick.
Yes.
And he'll find out when he's in his early 50s or in his late 50s that some of these things will be more attractive to him than when he's in his late teens or early 20s.
Mm-hmm. And then he'll begin to think more about how important it is to have retirement benefits and to have insurance and this sort of thing.
Right.
And also when his kids begin to grow up and he
Right.
has a kid that has a appendectomy or
Right.
something else, why this would be... Well, a fellow was telling me a couple of weeks ago that I interviewed that he was driving his car out in Arizona and his wife had a kidney attack or some such thing. And that he had forgotten about his insurance. And it occurred to him, boy, what a tremendous expense this is going to be. And he stopped the car, went, found the doctor and took her to the hospital, and she was hospitalized for a few days. And he began to check back, and the insurance covered almost the total bill.
Mm-hmm.
And this was just a fantastic thing to him.
All the fringe benefits in the shop today are fantastic.
Gene, how much do you remember about how much you earned a week when you went to work at Warner Gear?
Oh, I suppose maybe $20 a week.
Uh-huh. And a young man today makes probably 7 or 8 times that much?
Right.
Now, prices haven't gone up that much. Cost of living hasn't gone up that much, has it?
Well, I don't think so. It's went up a lot, but I don't believe it's went up that much.
No, I would guess here that this fellow probably has twice the standard of living that you had.
He's quiet, that's right.
Yes. So in spite of the fact that the cost of living has gone up 200% or 300%, his wages have gone up 800%.
Right.
So he's still way ahead.
Mm-hmm.
How do you account for this? How is it possible for a man working in the factory today to enjoy twice the standard of living that he enjoyed 35 years ago? Is it better technology?
Well, it's better technology, and of course, as the union has demanded and negotiated for more money, why new methods have been put in effect to produce this stuff, maybe cheaper.
I was wondering about that, and no one has suggested that. I wonder if labor hasn't had a stimulating influence on management here.
Right, it has, because something had to be done, and this is what's brought this about.
Uh-huh.
In other words, I don't think it's strictly been. Of course, we've had a lot of automation, but I don't think it's all because of automation that brought this about. Is new methods of running these parts. I don't think a man hasn't had to work hard, but by these new methods, he might produce more parts with a lot less energy than he used to, through the more modern techniques of producing these parts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Gene, what do you see in the future? Do you see continued progress here in the standard of living and also in harmonious relations between factory worker and management, labor unions and management? Are you pessimistic? Do you feel that we reached the height as far as we can go and that we don't know where we're headed for now?
Well, sometimes I'm a little concerned about the future on account of the anarchy we're having in the colleges here. That this may carry over to the younger people that's going into industry. They may have the same attitude,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know what this might lead to.
Gina, that raises a couple of questions. Number one, are you getting the same caliber of young man in industry now that you got 30 years ago during the Depression? Are these young men now going to college first and becoming engineers, and they go into industry, they no longer work for you on the machines, but they work somewhere in the designing office or somewhere else?
Well, of course, we're getting the young people that's coming into shops here. But of course, many of them come in with a little bit different attitude than they did when I went in the shop. Of course, this may not all be their fault. It may be a carryover from environments that they've had from home, say.
Well, the other related question that I had in mind to ask is, do these people that are coming in the shop now, the young fellows, do they intend to stay in the shop, or they look upon it as a temporary stepping stone to something better?
I think the boys, most of the boys are coming in the shop today are coming in there to make a career out of the shop there. I think that the factory work has become very attractive to a young man today, more so than maybe it did when I went in there. Shop on account of the frequency of layoffs, and the factory job pays good money now. There'll be a few boys who'll come in there that maybe wants to come in and work a while and go to college, but as a general rule,
you'll keep a good percent of it.
Good rule. The ones that wants to go to college, you'll get right in there after you get out of school.
Gene, I'm teaching a class at the University now in political science. It meets twice a week, evenings. And probably, I have about 80 students, probably 20 of them work in the factories during the day. Now, do you encourage this or do you discourage this? If a young man comes in to work for you when he's 19 or 20 years old, or out of service in his early 20s, the way I did, for example, he comes in and talks with you about his future. Do you help him work out his plans for the future? You work with him and consult with him and talk with him and try to encourage him to realize whatever plans he can, that sort of thing?
I encourage anybody that's trying to help himself, whether it's to better himself in the shop or go to school.
Yeah.
Because he's bound to make somebody a better employee, whether it's either me or he's going to make a more useful citizen.
Well, now this is exactly the attitude that prevailed when I was there, because I talked with you, and I know that you told me that, and you gave me encouragement, and I've appreciated it, and I wonder if this attitude still prevails, and I'm sure it does. Now, as you know, I'm with a college now, and I'm in administration, pretty much as your supervision here. And once in a while we have a top administrator who will say, well, don't send these fellows away to the university to get their doctors, because if they get their doctors, we'll lose them. Is there any attitude? And of course I say this is nonsense, because if we lose them, someone else will get them, and society will profit, and we'll be happy that we helped the man along.
I've got this philosophy I had when I was on the school board here, that we ought to do everything we could do to see that there wasn't any high school dropouts. Because those dropouts was going to live in this community just like somebody that finished his education.
That's right.
And we wanted to make everybody a useful citizen we could. And in spite of what we might say, them dropouts was going to be with us. And they would be a problem. So anybody that's wanting to better himself, you ought to encourage him, because it's going to help somebody. It's going to be beneficial to somebody.
Gene, do you have any kind of a school or working arrangement with Muncie Trade School or Ball State University where your people, whether they be young fellows working on the assembly line or operating the machines, or your new supervisors, can get courses that will help them and advancing themselves and improving their own condition?
Recently, of course, we've got the apprenticeship program for people's
in skilled trades.
In skilled trades. In other words, we work with the trade. They work with trade schools to get their English and math and stuff that they have to journeyman, finish their journeyman program. Now, however, they've been a program instituted at the plant there recently where people could enroll in Ball State. Tuition would be paid, where that they would take approved courses.
This is good. I didn't know about that. It's
Yeah.
the sort of thing that if you had Warner Gear in Miami, that we'd be very interested in working with you on.
That's right.
So I'm delighted to know that you worked this out with Ball State now. And I think my own opinion is that more could be done along this line, both for the labor unions ought to take advantage of it, I think.
Well, of course, it benefit them. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not
right.
only the supervisor, but it's anybody in the plant there.
Well, you people certainly have a tremendous opportunity here with a state university located in Musty. And I'm sure from spending time talking with the administrators, Dr. Farrell and Dean Kanker and some of the others, and also Dr. Kallmeyer, who's assistant to President Cruz now, that you have a wonderful community-university relationship, and I think this is a great asset to the total community. And there's so many things that industry needs education for, and education needs industry for.
Right.
One supports the other.
Right.
And I think this is a tremendous opportunity. Well, looking around, Musty's changed a long time. I've been away, as you know, for a dozen years or so. But it looks better to me now than it did when I went away, and I think you have a very promising future here in this community. Another question, a related question I wanted to ask you when you brought up the back door of what we call anarchy, the university campuses. Fortunately, I probably ought to knock on wood, but at Miami-Dade we haven't been faced with this problem, despite the fact that we have the largest community college in the world. And we may someday be faced with it. But I'm interested in your comments on this, because you were a young man who went out into the world in the 1930s. You went into the factory to earn a livelihood. Labor unions were organized, and at the time they were considered, if not revolutionary, at least highly questionable by the old established upper middle classes in Muncie, I'm sure, as elsewhere. What's the difference today, Gene, as you see it, between what's happening to the young people who are going into the colleges and with this attitude of anarchy, and you fellows who graduated in the 1930s and went to work in the factories and organized the labor unions?
Well, of course, I've seen a lot of this thing happen since the late 30s, since organizations started to boom here, and my experience on the school board and the city council helped me a lot. But I would have to say, in all honesty, that sometimes I think that maybe our society today is geared to force.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean that if somebody don't get what they want, they're going to force somebody. In other words, I thought this thing for a long time. Fact of the matter, when I was on the school board a few years back, it was almost unheard of. Teachers would make demands like they're making today. Now, I knew that the teachers was denied a lot of things that they should have, and I felt sure. In fact, the matter, I even told my colleagues many and many times that they would see a lot of things happen today in the teacher profession that was happening because I'd seen the same thing happen to the factory workers. In other words, some of the things was denied them, wasn't fair. In other words, just happened to be that that board members had never been exposed to the labor movement like I had, and could see what that had happened, such as maybe terminating a teacher's employment without just cause, other than just taking the hearsay of somebody.
That used to happen.
That used to happen with teachers, and I remembered I told them many a time. I said, now you can't hire a teacher there working for 4 or 5 years, and of course many states has a 10-year law, and when they come up to 10-year, that you've decided then that rather than take a chance to put them on lifetime employment, you're going to terminate their employment. I told them there'll be a day that you won't ever get by at that. Just come up here and you've not got any record to substantiate what you're going to tell me as a board member that they're not a qualified teacher now, after maybe teaching maybe 4 or 5 years. I said, now, industry, I says, we can't terminate a man's employment just because for some reason or other we don't like him. I said, we can terminate their employment if we've got just cause. But agreements have been reached between management and company and the union that you must show just cause. Why that you would divorce a man from his livelihood.
Now, has the labor union encouraged management to be more fair and impartial and objective, and to look more carefully at just cause, the question of just cause, before they lay a man off or fire a man, discharge a man?
Has union brought this about?
Well, have they at least helped bring it about?
Well, there's no question about that. This all boils down today that where you've got to have better supervision. That this don't always mean a supervisor in a factory. This means that you've got to have a better supervisor, whether in educational or what they are, to give good, honest, fair decisions.
Let me ask you, for the record and for my own information too, I'm going to keep a copy of these tapes, incidentally, Gene. But let me ask you, as a supervisor in a major corporation, the largest one in Muncie, really almost the backbone of the Muncie community. If you took Warner Gear out, I don't know what would happen.
Right.
And again, you've been a supervisor here for better than 20 years. I've been in college management or administration 4 or 5 years. We're still groping, and I'm still learning how one does manage a large corporation, a large institution. What, in your opinion, are some of the things that mark a good administrator or a good supervisor in an institution such as Warner Gear or a college? What are some of the qualifications that a young man that you're going to promote to a foreman, and hopefully this is a young man who in 20 years from now will have continued to have proved himself and developed and grown with the institution where you have? What are some of the requirements for managerial skill and ability working with people?
Well, of course, number one is that he's got to realize that there's 2 sides to every problem.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes more than that, maybe.
That's right, but there's always 2 sides.
Uh-huh.
And he's got to be a man that can give and take on decisions. He's got to be a man big enough to change his mind if he's proven wrong.
Or to admit that, or to accept it even if he is.
If he is wrong, of course he's got to accept it without. Number one is carrying a grudge against somebody if he does get his decision reversed.
Well, how about respect for his fellows he's working with?
Number one is he's got to be a man that commands the respect of his co-workers. That'd probably be the number one requisite.
How does he get it?
Being fair. Being fair. That's
Not always by giving everyone what he wants.
being fair. In other words, we're being fair. In other words, he can't always give everybody what he wants. That'd be unrealistic. But as long as he's fair, my experience is that the people are smart enough to know where a man's fair or not.
Yeah. Now I remember that no one ever questioned about you, about your integrity or about your honor and that sort of thing, because they always knew that they could take for granted. But they didn't always agree with you maybe on a point of how particular decisions should be implemented in the last detail, that sort of thing. But still, there wasn't any question about it. They knew that you were a man who had ability and who had honesty and integrity, and they could always come to you with their problems and talk with you about them. And this was true, Gene, also of people in labor, of course. They knew that.
Oh, yeah, sure. Of course, I've always distanced myself to not carry a grudge against anybody in all my working with people. I think this thing has helped me more than any one thing that I can think of.
Mm-hmm.
Because being in supervision for some 21 years and being on the school board for 9 years, city council, you know that you couldn't agree with everybody. Many instances.
Of course not.
You had disagreements, but I always try to keep these things honorable disagreements.
Right. Gene, are we moving into a period of superabundance to such a degree that our young people take it for granted and they no longer feel that they are charged with a sense of responsibility for achievement and for continuing to work toward improvement of society? Now, we had real challenges in the 40s and 50s when I was a young man. And you had even greater challenges in the 1930s when you started off. Now this, I suspect, Gene, whether we are aware of it or not, probably acted as a stimulant to us, because there were so many things that we wanted to do. You know, we wanted a nice home to live in, and we wanted to be able to send our kids to college and a lot of other things. These things, the younger generation inherit. Your son does, my son will, and the other people. Is this are we defeating our own purpose as a second generation, and will a third generation continue to carry progress of civilization forward, or will they take things so much for granted that they will stop working as hard to improve the situation and maybe just become self-indulgent and demand immediate satisfaction the way we see on the college campus today? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, of course, I don't know where I'm answering your question or not, Dan.
Maybe I would ask a very good question.
But I'd still say that we've got to go back to the one thing, and that's to respect authority.
Mm.
And until such time, I think we're gonna have this trouble.
Yeah. Now, to respect authority, of course, you recognize the right to honest dissent.
Right.
And the right to try to change institutions or rules in what you consider to be a desirable direction.
Right.
But the thing that I think sets off the current younger generation, the fellows in their 20s now, and 30s to some degree, is that they want this change to be brought about instantaneously and by radical measures, and they want it done immediately, and they don't want to compromise.
That's right. In other words, you take an industry there, of course, naturally we have what we call these wildcat strikes, but when we have difference of opinion with a group of men, we generally, the supervisors will generally try to get some responsible people. You can't talk to everybody, but a few responsible people to come in where we talk about this situation without them just taking over and tearing up the factory.
Right. And on the other hand, I suspect that supervision by now realizes that you don't take a bullwhip out and crack it the way they used to back in the 20s and 30s. You try to reason with them in.
That's right.
And it has to be a give and take, compromise situation.
That's right. You've got to talk to them, but you've got to let them understand that you can't talk to thousands of them. You've got to talk to a small group that you can
reason with. Now, Gene, what differences do you think are necessary in a supervisor today? What differences in qualifications and in attitudes, if any, prevail today over those of the 1920s and 1930s? Do you have a different type of individual?
Yeah, supervision is more sophisticated. In other words,
tell me a little about that.
In other words, supervisors used to be able to, you might say, rule by force. In other words, through threats and so on and so forth. And what I mean, supervision is more sophisticated. Supervision, you got to sit down and explain some of these problems, some of these employees. And good supervisors got to be able to convey the message where they agree with him or not.
Uh-huh.
In other words, he's got to be able to communicate with the employees. Used to be here, it's just whatever the foreman said was right. But in other words, it's a give and take proposition today.
Which way should it be, Gene?
Well, it should be a give and take.
Because no foreman, just because he has the authority, is always right.
No, nobody can. I don't care what you say. Can do his best work under threats and under duration.
Right. Now, what? Now, do the workers in general recognize this as you do?
Oh, yeah, I think so, basically.
Labor union leaders recognize that, basically?
Oh, I think so. In other words, we've all got our jobs to do. Labor leaders got their job to do, and I recognize this thing. I've been in, I've had an opportunity to work with them for a long, 20 years, and I realize that they've got a problem. They've got a job to represent their people, just like I've got a job to represent management. And we both got a job to do, and we both got to recognize this. And supervision today has got to be better. You're going to have better supervisions, not only today, but tomorrow.
On what basis do you promote people to supervision?
Oh,
what? I guess this is really close to the question I asked a while ago about the qualifications. But what do you use as criteria? How do you decide that this is a man that probably would do a good job?
Well, number one, I don't know if you put it number one. One of the things is we'd have to choose a man that would be able to get along with people.
That would be an important.
That would be important. In other words, regardless of how much knowledge a man had, if he couldn't get along with people today in supervision, he'd be in constant trouble.
That wouldn't have been the case 30 years ago.
No.
You could have chosen a man, and the people would have had no recourse.
No recourse.
If he told a man that he was going to fire him, or he had to speed up his machine, or he had to work 12 hours a day, whatever it is, the employee had nothing to do but to obey.
Yeah.
Regardless of how just or unjust it may have been.
We would choose a fellow today. We'd put several people on supervision, and we wouldn't think about putting a man on supervision if we felt like he couldn't get along with people, because he would be in constant trouble with himself. And he'd be tore up all the time, along with causing a lot of dissension among the employees.
Do you have any sort of an internship program that you work with your new?
We have an opportunity there. You was the same thing one time as a group leader, and
I didn't have that job too long, Gene. I've been on it 3. I don't know if you remember.
Well, I know that.
I really enjoyed it.
But that time there, that gives us a chance there to kind of look a fellow over to see what he can do, how he manages this group. Maybe it might be a group, as you know. Maybe he might have anywhere from 6 to maybe 15 or 20 or 30 employees that it's his responsibility to manage that group. In other words, work in the group system there.
There was nothing wrong with that group. The only thing they needed is someone to tell them if they go to work, they could make money. You see.
Well, that's right. But this is one of the secrets of being a good group leader. If he can get this job done, and this gives us a chance to look over these employees, and if he's a good group leader, don't necessarily mean he'd be a good supervisor, but
it gives you a chance to look at.
We know if he's not a good group leader, he wouldn't make a good supervisor.
Yeah,
we can know that'd be for sure. But this is no reflection on them. Just everybody can't be probably a good supervisor.
That's right. Just the way in a college you might be a good department chairman, but you would not be a good dean.
That's right. We've got just like in the school system, we've got good teachers, and we've got, I'd honestly say, we've probably got some poor teachers. And
sure.
That's the same way in the shop. It's no different. You look at all over, we got good employees and we've got some poor employees. And this is one of the things that you've got to live with.
Mm-hmm. Gene, another question that occurs to me, you're working in the largest machine shop in the community. What's the future of the machine shop? Is there really a threat that men will be replaced by machines, and 20 or 30 years from now, your job won't be there, and the department foreman's job won't be there, and the machine operator won't be there?
No. Of course, there's a lot of industries that's more automated than the Warner Gear is, but as these plants become automated, it just almost reverses the ratios. In other words, in automation, it takes a lot of skilled technicians.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, highly skilled machine repairmen and electricians and people of that nature. And whereby a machine that's not fully automated, I mean a factory, it takes machinists that can run machines.
Mm-hmm.
But when these plants become automated, it just reverses. In other words, on the plants that's not automated, they don't have to have so many skilled technicians. And then when you get into these automated plants, they just reverse the trend, see? In other words, in a plant that's automated, I can't tell you what the ratio is, but say that for each 10 non-skilled employees, maybe they've got one skilled employee.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now, say that's in a automated plant. Well, one that's not automated, maybe they've got one skilled employee for maybe 20 or 30 non-skilled employees.
But we're not going to, in the foreseeable future, eliminate the non-skilled factory operative. There's going to be work there to be done.
There's going to be work to be done. In other words, they'll be doing it in a little bit different fashion than what they are now, but the work will still be there. They've never come up with any way to find any way to replace the work.
Well, Gene, we're coming close to the end of the tape, and I want to express to you my very profound gratitude for your willingness to take the time out. I know that at the same time that you got this tremendous and well-merited promotion to superintendent, that you had an illness that you discovered shortly after that, and you've been most generous to take the time out to spend with me today, and I appreciate it deeply. And again, I know beyond question that your comments are going to be very helpful to students for many years to come who want to know what conditions were like at Warner Gear in the 1930s, 50s, and 60s. From the point of view of a man who has spent, some 35 years in the factory and has held jobs both with the labor organization and on supervision all the way from, I suppose, group leader up to superintendent.
Right.
Again, Gene, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.